What is an adult problem you were not prepared for? One Tuesday night, I was driving home after my shift around 2 a.m. The roads were empty, just me and the occasional truck. My car had been making this weird grinding noise for a few days, but I figured it was nothing serious. Cars make noises, right? Then, under this concrete bridge about 10 miles from my place, my Honda just died. Not like it stalled out. I mean, it made this horrible metal-on-metal screaming sound and completely stopped moving. I coasted to the shoulder and tried starting it again. Nothing. The engine wouldn't even turn over. I sat there for a minute, trying not to panic. Then I remembered I had roadside assistance through my insurance. Except when I called, they told me my subscription had expired 3 months ago. I'd canceled it to save $40 a month for groceries. Brilliant. So I called a tow truck. The guy who answered sounded like he'd been woken up, which he probably had. When I told him where I was, he said it'd be $200 just to tow it to the nearest garage. My stomach dropped. I had $48.73 in my checking account. Payday wasn't for 5 more days. I started calling friends. Jake was totally broke until Friday. My roommate from college said he'd help, but was 3 states away. My coworker Ryan didn't even answer. I thought about calling my parents, but they were struggling with their own bills and lived 12 hours away anyway. By 3 a.m., I was still sitting there. I popped the hood and stared at the engine like somehow I'd figure out what was wrong. Everything looked like metal and tubes to me. I had no idea what I was looking at. The worst part was realizing I had to work again in 6 hours. I called my supervisor, Kevin, and explained the situation. He just sighed and said, "Look, Alex, we're already short-staffed. You've missed 2 shifts this month. Figure it out or we'll have to discuss your position here." I wanted to scream at him that missing work because you're sick is different from being stranded on a highway at 3 a.m., but I needed this job. So I just said I'd figure something out. That's when I started walking. 10 miles to my apartment, in my work boots, carrying my backpack. It took me almost 3 hours. My feet were destroyed by the time I got home, and I was soaked in sweat even though it was October. But here's the kicker. When I finally reached my apartment building at 6 a.m., I realized my car keys were still in the ignition of my dead Honda, and my house keys were on the same key ring. I had to wake up my neighbor, this older guy named Paul, who I'd talked to maybe twice. I explained the situation, and he let me use his phone to call a locksmith. Another $120 I didn't have. By the time I got inside, it was 8 a.m. I had to be at work at 10 a.m. for a double shift. I hadn't slept, my car was dead on the highway, and I had no way to get to work. I ended up borrowing $50 from Paul just to take an Uber to work. Kevin wasn't happy that I looked like I'd been hit by a truck, but at least I showed up. The next day, I had to borrow $200 from my coworker Dan to get my car towed. But when the mechanic looked at it, he said the transmission was completely shot. The repair would cost $1,400. That was basically my entire month's salary. For the next 6 weeks, I lived on instant ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I walked to work when Dan couldn't give me rides. I borrowed money from anyone who would lend it. My credit card got maxed out paying for the car repair. I started keeping a coffee can in my kitchen after that. Every week, I'd throw whatever change I had in there, even if it was just $1. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I had some tiny buffer against the next disaster.